afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. That's a lie. People, you're expecting me to speak to you. You want me to be the great statesman, as you just witnessed, a great statesman. That's a lie, too. But I'd rather just visit with you a bit. You see, I finished my presidency, and before that 8 years as Secretary of State under Mr. Jefferson, the man most maligned in the last few minutes. But I want to express my great admiration for my great good friend, Mr. Jefferson. We're almost neighbors down in Virginia, in our country of Virginia. You see, we have a nation and we have a country. And I owe great allegiance and to both of those. And while I take exception to a few things that Mr. Hamilton has just laid before you, I must confess that he is a great gentleman in many respects. We happen to see things rather differently on many issues. But the fact of the matter is, he has that right. And I defend that right as far as life and limb will allow. We have in our thinking somehow come to the conclusion that we all must agree on certain things. Well, that will never happen. We will never all agree on everything. And indeed, I would say that is the beauty, the brilliance of our American system, of our constitutional framework, is because we don't have to agree on everything. We hopefully agree on some things. But we each individually as persons have our own genius or ignorance that comes forth from time to time. Now, I have been accused on occasion, now Mr. Hamilton accused me of a number of things, but I've been accused of being a person who takes a different position on certain issues at one time and then another. Well, let me explain that in certain cases that is a true statement. But it is because I believe that there must always be, in a society as wide and different as ours, there must be a balance that exists between the various powers of position and association that people gather together in, such that in the long term no particular position becomes so strong that it can stamp out any other position. And therefore, when Mr. Hamilton and I were working together on the Federalist, I was indeed a very strong supporter of our having a much strengthened national government. I had served in the Continental Congress. I had served in the Virginia State Legislature. I was part of the Governor's Council during the war. And I had seen firsthand the folly of a state government that was run roughshod by a governor, in this case Patrick Henry, who wanted to have things entirely his way and who would do what was necessary to make sure that happened, and who cared not a whit nor a way for the nation as a whole. On the other hand, in the Continental Congress, I witnessed a situation in which any decision arrived at had to be approved by a unanimous vote of the 13 states. Can you imagine that happening? On top of which, for a state to vote a particular way, they had to have a majority of the delegates from that state agreeing with that position. So you could have a wide variety of perspectives in the Congress, but you had to have unanimous agreement to get anything done, and you had to have a majority of the delegation to get a local representative vote from that particular state or country within the nation. It was almost useless. We had no executive to speak of. We had to grant rather extraordinary powers to Mr. Robert Morse because there was no other way to deal with things. But in that particular case, it worked out that some friends of Mr. Morse probably gained a bit more from that relationship than any of the rest of us, and certainly the country as a whole. No, we needed to change things. We needed to improve things. And the end result of all of that was the Constitutional Convention. Mr. Jefferson was not in the country. He was representing us in Paris. Mr. Adams was not in the country. He was representing us, well, in London or wherever he could. And so it was left to the rest of us to try to arrive at something. This is where General Washington and I became really very good friends. We had not known each other during the war. He was off fighting it, and I was either in Richmond or in Philadelphia or wherever we could get the Continental Congress together in the latter stages. But I did what I could to support him. But the thing is, what we had to do for the Constitutional Convention was to put together the best ideas that were available. Some of them had been around an awful long time. They came from sources like the ancients, the Greeks, the Romans, but also the Scots, and even a few Englishmen. I expressed great admiration for Mr. John Locke, as did Mr. Jefferson. It was Mr. John Locke who formulated the idea that government should basically be in existence to protect life, liberty, and property. Now, when Mr. Jefferson took that as he was formulating the lines in the Declaration of Independence, he changed the third line, the third word, to the pursuit of happiness, and declined to define it. I asked him once about the change from property to the pursuit of happiness, and he indicated that he felt, particularly as a slave owner and knowledgeable about the slavery system, which at that time was legal in every state in the Union, every proposed state in the Union that we were about to conceive in the time of 1776, Mr. Jefferson said that he thought that it would be necessary to use another term. And so the felicitous result was the pursuit of happiness. Now, I want to call your attention, though, to the next line in the Declaration of Independence. You see, as Mr. Jefferson was not present for the Constitutional Convention, I was not present in the Continental Congress when the Declaration of Independence was under consideration. We sort of changed roles there, you see. But in this particular case, the next line that Mr. Jefferson inserted is that in order to preserve those liberties, those rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, governments are instituted among men. That's the purpose of government, to protect those qualities. And as a result, it seems to me that government, the form of government is important, but also the end of government is important. And sometimes the end of government is to be silent. Let me give you an example of this. It's something that was present in the Constitutional Convention. It was present in the Constitution, but I made it explicit in the first of the amendments to the Constitution that I proposed as a Bill of Rights. And that is that on the one hand, the government should make no law establishing religion. Now, specifically, the term establishing meant the government should not tax people to support religion. But it also meant that the government should not pick out any religion, and I do not mean here Baptist, Methodist, or Presbyterians. I mean any religion, Christian, Jewish, Mohammedan. The government should not pick one out and say this is the religion that all should follow, and the others should be forbidden entirely. All should be treated equally. All are interested parties and should have the right to exist. So the government should be silent with regard to religion. It should also defend the right of its individual citizens to pursue whatever religious beliefs or ideas or foolishness, however you may want to view it, that they have. That is a very important right that individuals have, and it must be protected. So, to be honest, that is a position on which I've been quite consistent. Indeed, here, one of the issues that I am writing notes on at the present, there is a move to place chaplains in the United States Army. And I am unalterably opposed to that for two reasons. One is we would be paying them. And I do not believe that the federal government should be paying anyone to be religious. And secondly, by having chaplains who would by necessity be Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, or what have you, we would be favoring one particular group over another. And I do not believe that that is a sound policy or one that should be followed. So, that is a point on which I have been quite consistent. Now, let me give you one on which people say I have been inconsistent. The latest charges in this regard have come up only recently, in the last year of my presidency. The proposal came forth from the Congress that we should re-charter a Bank of the United States. Now, I will tell you forthrightly that when this was first proposed by Mr. Hamilton through his Federalist cohorts, they didn't call themselves that yet, but they were of that ilk, in the Congress. This was the very first Congress that existed in 1789. I rose and thundered. Well, I couldn't thunder. I didn't have the lung power to thunder. But I used every bit of eloquence I might muster to argue against a Bank of the United States, arguing that it was unconstitutional. I felt that it was not a power specifically allocated to the national government or to Congress to authorize, and therefore it should not be allowed. I believed in the enumerated powers of government as laid down in the Constitution. If it were not written there, it was not allowed. Now, I took that position because what I saw was the possibility that a Bank of the United States at that very critical and vulnerable time in our history could be something that would have immense economic and political influence in the country. And so I opposed it because I was afraid it would throw things out of balance. And in many respects, I'm afraid it did. But it was chartered for 20 years. That is from 1789 until 1809. Now, that's a significant time period. That meant that it was coming up for renewal, rechartering in 1809. I was President of the United States. Had just been elected and inaugurated in March of that year. Elected a little earlier. And I argued against the rechartering at that time. However, and I was successful, by the way, at that instance. We did not recharter the bank. However, there was a bit of unpleasantness that ensued. I believe you may be familiar with it. In 1812, I found it necessary to go before Congress and request a declaration of war against our former colonial power of control and our foe in the American Revolution, in this case, Great Britain. This was as a part of the wars with Napoleon. And I felt that the instance of that war was drawing us to a position where we could no longer put up with what the British were doing, supporting the Indians in the West, taking our sailors off our ships and pressing them into the British Navy in the Atlantic, all of those kinds of issues. I felt we had to declare war. It was a war for which we were ill prepared. Part of the reason we were ill prepared is we did not have a national system of finance that could bring it and quickly marshal our capability to fight. As it happened in that war, which some have, I hear, begun to call, well, they first called it Mr. Madison's War, but they've come to call it the War of 1812, being kind to me, I suppose. The fact is that what has come about of that is that we won that war. You can call a draw a win, and that's truly what it was. But we won that war by not losing it. And if you think about it, that's the way we won the first war. We won it by not losing it. And with the help of the French, who, by the way, Mr. Hamilton was not a supporter of that. He was an Anglophile if ever there was one. But in 1814, having an alliance with the French was not an option. At that particular time, I believe that Mr. Napoleon was on the Isle of Elbe in exile. And the French had been defeated, at least temporarily. Nonetheless, what we had to do at that particular time was to pull everything together to resist as best we could. And it was a very near thing. I will tell you that a battle that took place at the end of that war, in 1815, 2 weeks after the signing of the peace treaty to end the war, was truly a very important battle. This was the Battle of New Orleans. General Andrew Jackson, who is a freebooter and a lot of different things, but he also can be a very capable general. And in this particular instance, I was very glad that he was. He led our troops and whoever else he could commandeer, including, I understand, a few French pirates, to resist the British Army in New Orleans. Now, you can say that a battle that happens 2 weeks after the end of the war is unimportant. But I have it on good information that had the British prevailed, they would have revoked the Treaty of Paris in an instant. And we would have had a much more difficult negotiating position. So that was a very particularly important victory. After the war, the issue of the bank came up again. I did not raise it, but I did take a different position when it came to my desk for a signature. I put my signature there. I did not campaign for it. I thought that might be unseemly. But on the other hand, I recognized that had we had the bank during the war, we'd have been better equipped to fight that. And so I approved it. You see, again, it's a matter of balance. And what happened and what the war demonstrated is that financially, without the bank, we were out of balance at that point. And so I felt that this brought us back in balance. Only time will tell if either that position or indeed the possibility of the corruption brought about by the bank is one that can that will rear its ugly head and bring about difficulties and problems to boot. I think that as we visit here, I should make a few observations in terms of my own personal family and connections. I've been very, very fortunate in that I was born into a loving family, that I had two strong parents. The first, James Madison. I'm James Madison, Jr. You may not know that. I don't sign my name that way, but except on official occasions. But I am the son of James Madison, and he was a far greater man than I. He passed away in 1801, just as I was about to become President of the United States. My good mother is still living, and I'm very pleased for that fact. So I had a great support at home. More to the point, I was the oldest son and could have been expected to be the one who would stay at home and make sure that the family plantation was operated properly. But my parents wanted me to have a good education. And they sent me off to the College of New Jersey, a Presbyterian institution, located in Princeton, New Jersey. And there I studied with the great Dr. Witherspoon. That particular outcome was most useful in terms of my understanding about the importance of the separation of church and state, as people describe it, and also in terms of my understanding of the operations of the physical universe and things about us. Now, as you may know, I was a bit older than many folks when I found my helpmate. I was involved in the American Revolution from the Continental Congress. I was involved in the writing of the Constitution, and I was in the Congress of the United States for 6 years. All of those things before I found my wife. It wasn't for lack of trying. I had earlier proposed to a young lady in Philadelphia. I hesitate to bring this up because I find it rather personally mortifying, but Miss Kitty Floyd was just a remarkable young lady, and I met her at the time that we were engaged in the Constitutional Convention. She was a bit younger than I. I was in my 30s, and she was all of ripe 16. But we had fallen in love, I thought, and had given our hand to one another. But she went off with her family on a little trip, and I got a letter a little after that time that was addressed to James, but I think she had John in mind. At any rate, it told me that she had changed her mind. So I went forward and served in the Congress from 1789, when it first convened, through 1794. And by that time I had met Mrs. Dolly Reed Payne. And she was recently widowed. Her husband had died in the yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia, and she had a young son that she had named for him, and we discovered that we were in love. So I married Miss Dolly, and I chose not to run for re-election to Congress after that. We actually had about 6 years at home in Montpelier. I certainly did not completely absent myself from the area of political thought in that time. In the outrages of the Adams administration, Mr. Jefferson and I found it necessary to write the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions that called for those states to withhold their approval of such things as the Alien and Sedition Acts and such. But I did enjoy those 6 years at home with Miss Dolly. She served me well as my wife in Washington City, as we served as Secretary of State. She was frequently the hostess in the presidential mansion for Mr. Jefferson, whose wife had died previously. And then she, of course, was truly the first lady of Washington and of our national existence. I cannot say enough about her. But I believe in the ending of this conversation, and hopefully the beginning of a true discussion that we may have, with Mr. Hamilton included. I would like to leave with you the thought that government is something that is a very necessary part of our lives. And it is a very necessary part of our lives because it does indeed protect the rights that you and I have as citizens of this country to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I speak of government that may be as simple as that of my home county of Orange in Virginia, or of the state government of my country of Virginia and Richmond, or of our national government, to which I hold ultimate allegiance in Washington City. Now that my good friend Mr. Monroe is installed as president, I am sure that we will see even greater things come for our nation as a whole, and I look forward to that. Ultimately, it is we as individuals who will make our nation into something great. But it is our government that helps to enable us to do that. So it is a partnership that we all share, and that we must be a part of, at least in my humble opinion. Well, I thank you for coming by today. I hope that it's been an interesting set of circumstances for you, and I believe that now we would welcome any questions, comments, or go ahead.